But that isn't what I want to talk about. What I suggest is that really we need to recognize the fact that for us, time is to be experienced in a different way. And to live a life of constant prayer is to live a life in which time is experienced differently. And what are the possibilities of a different experience of time? See, this seldom occurs to us. I mean, we think that there is only one possibility. There's clock time. That's the only time there is. Well, now let's begin by facing the fact that there is no time. Time is something purely constructed by us. Time is simply a projection of our own inner condition and our own inner adjustment to, of course, we do have an evolving life, a becoming life, but time isn't out there. I mean, you know, if God is dead, why don't we get busy on something more important about time being dead, for example? If you make a statement that, I mean, it's exactly the same kind of a proposition. If modern man is said to experience God as dead, which in some respects he does, see, that is to say, conceptual knowledge of God is to him often irrelevant. Well, it should be very easy for him also to experience time as non-existent, but he can't, because it is proper to our kind of society to not experience conceptual ideas of God as relevant, but time is immensely relevant because everything is built around it. If you got rid of all the clocks and so forth, the whole thing would collapse instantly. See, and if nobody told you what time it was, we'd manage for about a day. But then, just imagine, supposing all the clocks and all the time chronometers of any kind, whatever, suddenly vanished, and everything else was the same, but you couldn't count time anymore. It would be a disaster for our society. Everything would stop. You couldn't catch any planes, you couldn't go anywhere, you couldn't do anything, and so forth. Now, there's nothing wrong with this particular concept of time. I mean, it works fine. But what we should realize is that it's not the only way to experience time. And, in fact, what it involves is a sort of alienated experience of time, which doesn't have to be the one by which you really live. See, in other words, it should be possible to take all this in one stride and to, be there on time when the plane's going or something like that, but not necessarily to think that that is the whole thing about time. So what I want to talk about then is this experience of time and the possibilities of different ways of experiencing time. When I was about, say, 14 years old, something like that, I spent the summer in a little English town in the south of England, a place called Rye, which is a very curious, unusual little town, built up on top of a hill, and it's sort of an ancient town that everything stopped about 300 years ago, say. And but it was a real groovy place in the 16th century still. It was one of the 5 English ports called the Cinque ports, they called them, Cinque, French with an E on the end, which were sort of harbors, a kind of naval bases, really, for defense against the Dutch and other people and so forth, to kind of protecting them all along the south. And they're all around the south corner of England, outside of along by Dover, and so Dover's one of them, and around the corner there. And, of course, this town had been abandoned by the sea. The sea, which used to come to the foot of the hill that the town was built on, is now 5 miles away. It's moved out. And so the town is left high and dry. And this town still has the atmosphere of the 16th century. And I lived in the house that had belonged to an Elizabethan dramatist, a fellow called John Fletcher, who was a famous contemporary of Shakespeare in writing, and it was right by the parish church. And up on the parish church was one of those little 16th century clocks with what they called quarter boys. That is, 2 little statues of sort of cherubs or something, and each one would hit the bell at the quarter hour, and it was fascinating. You sort of waited for this to come around, and they would bong, bong, bong on the bell. And then in the house, was a great big old clock